Keep filling it in, because keep filling in my information. It's very helpful because there are also things that I don't know about it. So when we see the person, we usually don't think anything's going on. For example, if your kid or you yourself are playing basketball and you go up for a rebound, and on the way down you get an elbow to the back of the head, visually the interaction doesn't look so bad, but like Doriana said, there could be so much more going on. You could have disrupted your brain connection. And this is where we have the result of a concussion. We don't need to lose consciousness necessarily for it to be a concussion. If you are knocked out or lose consciousness, you definitely should go get medical attention. And then usually observed symptoms, you see the person, they're a little bit clumsier, they answer questions a little bit slowly, they forget instruction or confused about their surroundings, they might even be confused recalling what happened. I had a concussion that was like this. I was playing soccer, I caught a ball and I brought it into my, I caught it forward and I landed forward, brought it into my face, and the two girls kept kicking the ball, but the ball was my head, and I got kicked on either side. And I definitely was very groggy, very confused. I had trouble walking. Then generally symptoms reported by the person who experiences the trauma, that you can get headaches or pressure in their head, nausea, vomiting, dizziness, blurred vision sometimes occurs, light and sound sensitivity, just like a general fogginess moving through your day. And then you often experience concentration issues and memory problems. Some of these symptoms don't happen immediately. Usually over time you'll start to experience them, and that's where like family members have trouble coping with the person, because they often forget, oh yeah, you hit your head 3 days ago. Why are you so angry? So just before I go into that, I wanted to talk about like, what do you do when you have this happen? The first thing to do is stop doing what you're doing. If you were weightlifting, stop weightlifting. If you were jogging and you fell and you hit your head, stop running. It will definitely lead to an increase of severity of symptoms. If you're vomiting after, go see your doctor. If your headache gets worse, go see your doctor. I had a friend in high school who was horsing around with his buddies, and he got hit in the head, and he had a brain bleed and he passed away. And all he had was, he vomited once and he had worsening headaches, and it wasn't something that he thought could happen. And unfortunately, he lost his life because of it. After concussion, you can experience post-concussive symptoms where these symptoms linger for quite some time. So this is where I come in. In 2015, I had a car accident. I wrapped my car around a pole. I slipped on some black ice. Definitely scared the crap out of my sister. And I experienced all of the post-concussive symptoms, specifically anger, depression, anxiety, light and sound sensitivity, sleep issues, memory issues. I was irrationally angry most of the time. One of my biggest triggers, sometimes you can have one person that triggers you more than everyone. So you can be talking perfectly fine with someone, and then the other person comes in and you're irrational about it. And for me, that was my mom, who I imagine this was very difficult for, and she was hovering. And I remember one time she offered me a glass of water, and I just went off the handle. I just was screaming at her. I don't even remember what I was screaming about, but it was very difficult. So what happens when you have a family member that you're dealing with that is experiencing this irrational anger and you happen to be the target. Things that helped for me, awareness. So I found that physical touch was a very big connection point. So I would have the person that I was getting mad at just like put their hand on my arm or my shoulder and say, you're very angry and you're yelling at me and it's hurting my feelings. And to have, the way that I describe it is like, if you're playing a video game and you're seeing things through your eyes. When I was irrationally angry, I had like a camera on me and I could see myself reacting, but it was like I couldn't control that person. And having them, you know, physically contact and bringing awareness to it brought me back into my body. So that was definitely something that helped me cope. And that was something that I had learned in therapy after, because I definitely recommend therapy if you're experiencing post-concussive symptoms, especially for the depression and anxiety. I remember I was at the brain injury clinic at Sunnybrook, and I had like flown through all of the other appointments, and it was my last appointment where I was going to get discharged, and the doctor had asked me some random recovery question, and I flew off the handle. It was like she had opened the floodgates of everything that she knew I was bottling up and was waiting for me to admit. And that's when I had gotten referred to therapy, and that's where I began practicing mindfulness and awareness, which is one of the coping strategies I want to talk about today. Doriana had a talk a little while ago where she was talking about referring people to therapy and the stigma around it. And it's true. I mean, like most of us, some of us are Italian, and I know that my parents definitely frowned upon therapy. They thought that if you were going to therapy, you were crazy. And the truth is we're not all born with the toolbox of how to deal with things. It's the same way we're not born knowing how to do math. We're taught math. So going to therapy is just someone giving you the tools to deal with all of the emotions you're feeling. So I began on a journey of meditation and writing down all of the things that hurt me, writing all of the triggers that I had, why they were triggers, and just always taking those a step deeper. And then the awareness to share those things with the people around me. Like, hey, if you notice that I'm getting triggered, have like a trigger word, like banana, something that's totally not something you would say in the context of that, so that you can zoom out of the situation that you're really in on. And I think that sometimes, because this isn't an injury that you always see, the family members and the person who is concussed don't realize they need support. So, like, please, I mean, I guess this is like just in daily life too, just be kind to each other, support each other. Sorry, I have, Peter, you had your fair share of concussions. That's no good. Hopefully you stop getting this. Oh. I see that someone, Alexander, on this call has had a concussion recently. I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you do want to talk about any of the symptoms you're feeling, I usually found that talking to other people who had concussions really helped to make you feel normal. In fact, I had a concussion support team that we all discussed our symptoms and the strategies that we used to get over them. So, does anybody have any questions that they want to specifically know about?
I think the way we viewed concussions, you know, has changed dramatically, because I know, like, when I was when I was fighting, um, a lot of the people who I was training with and competing with have been concussed, right? And it was kind of a normal thing. And I want to say it was almost like you kind of laugh it off. Like it was just something that happens. And out of ignorance, you don't do anything about it because you're like, well, we've all been messed up in the head, and it just becomes the norm. But obviously, like the more you think about certain things, and then I see like the way, like the way you were talking about how you might have been unreasonable during that time of recovery. I'm like, and there was during other times of my life where I was dealing with other things, and I was like, and I'm trying to think, I'm like, is it because I had a concussion? Maybe that's why I was like that. Like I was so unreasonable, and I would be so short, and it was just like it didn't make any sense. I'm like, could have been that. Like you know what I mean? Again, because I had my bell rung, and that's just the way it was. And you kind of recover because you can't see it, so it's like, oh, you're probably normal. And then you start thinking about the people that were around you. You think about coaches or other fighters and this and that, and you're like, all of them slurred. All of them, there was like a delay in everything that they did, and you just kind of get normalized to it, and not realizing the serious effects, and like you don't know what effects it had outside of the gym of them training, right? And it's crazy to see like how serious, and how you had like a whole support team to help you, and the reality of that, and how many people go through this and just like, okay, you can't really see anything. You can't see like a physical change in it in the person. So you're like, they're probably normal, but really there's so much going on underneath. And, I think the awareness would change people's perception on how to treat it, not just like, you got your head smashed in or whatever, and you'll be fine. When really it's like, no, you're not. And it's going to affect you, and you might lose jobs, or you might, develop certain addictions or things that I think of, like all these other people that I know. And it could have been a big possibility that they didn't treat or handle their concussions properly, because I knew a lot of people who had concussions.
Well, Chris, think about how long you rehabbed your shoulder.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you rehab any of your concussions that long?
Honestly, like there's this one time, because again, we know about like the risk. It's not the first concussion, it's the second one. The one that can be super, super serious, right? And it doesn't have to be the same degree where you're getting kicked in the head. It could just be the right touch in the wrong time, in the wrong place, in the wrong angle. And that's the one that just like, has the lifelong effects. And I remember when I fought one time, I got knocked out like pretty bad. I called my mom that night to tell her I lost. And my mom told me when I was in Germany, when I came back from Germany, my mom's like, I had no idea what you were saying. You made zero sense to me. I was just like, okay, just like kind of leave him be, because I don't want to get him freaked out that I can't understand a word he's saying. And then I fought 2 weeks after, right? And I'm like, yeah, I fought again. Like, you're not supposed to.
Definitely not.
By like, if I was fighting in Canada, they would see my passport, my fighting passport, and you have to have a minimum of 30 days or something like that. Or, I don't know, maybe it was 3 months. I don't remember the law. But because I was in Germany and then going to Canada, I'm like, no one's going to know. And I'm going to just fight. And what's the big deal? But that's 1,000% ignorance, right? And thank God nothing happened.
Did you find that your motor skills were delayed?
The time that I was fighting, especially near the end, and so much time's passed by, I slurred a lot. If you think I mumble when I speak now, you should have heard me before. And it was to the point, it was like, you know what I'm saying, as long as you kind of hear some of the letters or the words, and you can just hopefully understand what I'm trying to say. I was like, it was good enough. Like, I was just so relaxed and lazy. I can't explain it. It was like a layer of dumbness going on.
Well, you're just floating through your reality.
Yeah, like when you say foggy, it was like, that's such an accurate term. I was just foggy for a while, and just, again, that becomes the norm, right? Because it becomes gradual, and you just think, oh, that's just the way it is, when really it's not.
So one of the things that I found really important for me was resting. Unfortunately, again, like we said, it's not an injury you can see, so everyone's like, go back to work. I went back to work, I think 2 weeks later, and sitting on a computer 8 hours a day, after the second hour, I was a zombie. And one of the things that they usually recommend is limiting screen time, because all of your senses, you're just overloaded with light. And for me, even sound, like the sound in my office of like the machines growing outside and would just make me so angry. Like I can't explain the anger either. It's the best way that I can verbalize the way that the anger felt was not like when somebody slights you and you're mad at them. It was like a full body anger, like like I trembled, um, and then I just like don't remember. I see Margaret laughing.
You kind of turn into the Hulk, Hulk mad.
I mean, Margaret experienced a lot of my anger. She was my primary support giver after the accident. She was there when I woke up in the hospital and had no idea what was going on. So.
Yeah, I got the call in the middle of the night by an officer, and we just rushed over to Sunnybrook. And then when I was there, I guess you can see the physical injuries because her face was sort of bashed up. They were picking the glass out of her face, and it was just surreal. I remember, she recognized me, and it was just constant repeating the same things over and over again. I remember, she would look at me and it's like, Marg, and then it's like, oh, I feel like I've been hit by a truck. And then, and I tell her, you got into an accident. And then she would say, oh, wow, you have to call my friend Alex. And it's like, okay. And 2 seconds later, and then it looked like she either fell asleep and then she would repeat the same thing over and over again. And this lasted all night. She must have said the same thing to me, oh gosh, about 1,000 times. And it was, I had the one nurse, who looked at me and she says, this is very common after. At first I started getting angry. It's like, why does she keep asking me the same things over and over again? And then you have, perspective, they're saying this is very common. And then you sort of just, humor her, when she's asking you, the 99th, 100th time, and you just keep asking the same thing, just keep saying the same things to her.
Yes.
I think that's all she needed was acknowledgement, assurance, maybe trying to keep her calm. But it is much more difficult for the people. Well, I mean, it's difficult for the person going through it. But once again, everyone around, my parents at the time were in Florida, so we didn't tell them what happened. So we kind of kept them in the dark because we didn't want to freak them out. But when they did come back, even, the first few days, she was just sleeping all the time. And, as part of the recovery. And, I think mom had a hard time with this. Like, why is she sleeping all the time? Why is, she just needs to get back to her, and, having them realize, this is something serious. We then showed them pictures of the vehicle, and the car was, like I said, it was squashed. It was, so she's very lucky she got out of, she got out with the minimum injuries that she did have. But it could have been so much worse. But I think only once they realized or saw the vehicle, the pictures that we showed them of the vehicle, I think they were able to comprehend, oh my gosh, what she had gone through.
I mean, they still sent me back to work 2 weeks later. So.
Yeah.
No, but in terms of that, like the support system of someone who, like having my sister there to be an advocate for me was really important because, again, I couldn't communicate with my mother without losing my mind. Even my brother a little bit was very triggering, just because my brother had also had a brain injury a few years back where he fell off a ladder and hit the back of his head. And one of his symptoms was loss of smell and taste a little bit. The taste has come back, but his sense of smell was completely gone. And so like you'll experience a whole bunch of symptoms and then you feel nuts because you're like, everyone thinks I'm fine. I'm going through all of these little things and I don't know if any of them are normal. And so having the support system, someone I can explain it to, I'm feeling this today, who is actively going to research that. Is this normal? What should I do? Or even like I had mentioned mindfulness and meditation and awareness. having someone practice those things with you, who's willing to put to actually do the things that you're learning about, definitely helps. Which is why, if you or someone you know does experience or have a concussion, sit with them, do your research, talk to them. Most of the time, the thing that they've been bottling down comes to the surface because it has no choice. And like Chris was saying last week, Chris Grosvenor, reach out to people. Like, reach out for help. People are willing to help you. I have a few of my friends on this call today who are a big help in my recovery as well. Their understanding of me needing to leave early, or making accommodations, or lowering the volume of the music while we were all together. All of those little things definitely helped me get better.
Victoria,
Yeah.
I'm not sure if this was available when you were playing soccer, but just maybe some good information especially for parents of kids who are playing particularly high contact sports. Baseline concussion testing. Did you ever have any of that stuff done, or was that maybe not around when you were playing? Probably wasn't as popular.
It wasn't.
No.
But definitely recommend it.
Yeah, so I mean, I came to learn of it because of my son's hockey, but just as in case anybody's kids are playing sports and they're not aware of this, because we've learned a lot more about concussions in the last few years, it's important to have your child have a baseline concussion test done. So I know Pierce's team, like, we did it as a team. There's a clinic called Concussion. I think it's just called Concussion, or Concussion Clinic or something, spelled with a K, on Weston Road here. And so what they do, there are people there who run the tests, but the clinic is overseen by neurologists. And so they do a baseline test. And then at any time in the year, if that child sustains a concussion, you go back to that clinic. And so this is nice because you don't have to, you don't necessarily have to go through the channels of going to your family doctor, getting referred to a neurologist. You go back to that clinic, and then they'll do a reassessment and assess the child for concussion severity, that kind of thing. So that's the first thing I would recommend, especially, like I said, for parents of kids who are playing contact sports. The second thing is, obviously not in soccer, but as a hockey mom, mouth guards. Mouth guards, again, I learned this just a few years ago, and I'm a doctor, so imagine that. I don't know how many people think that mouth guards are to protect kids' teeth when they're playing. They are not. That is a secondary gain. They are to prevent concussions. So it drives me crazy when I'm seeing these kids playing hockey and they're chewing on their mouth guards, they're half out their mouth, they're not using them at all, because at a certain age, kids don't like wearing them and the coaches don't enforce it. But the mouth guard is acting as a shock absorber. So if that kid gets a hit to the head, most of the force is going to be absorbed by that mouth guard and prevent it from going to the brain. So really important, especially in sports, like hockey and that kind of stuff, to be wearing the mouth guards. And then just the last thing I was going to say was about return to work and stuff. So our guidelines have changed in the last couple of years. So really important, if you do, even if you think you have a concussion, but you're not sure, because concussion is not just loss of consciousness, right? You can have a concussion where you're totally awake the whole time. A common symptom is what you were describing, that retrograde amnesia, where you don't remember a certain period of time leading up to the injury. But your return to sport and return to work now has to be it's a very stepwise approach, guided by a physician, because it's it's patient driven almost. So it just depends on symptoms. So the fact that you were back at work 2 weeks later is absolutely appalling now. And hopefully that would never happen anymore. And explains why, you were feeling so crappy. But yeah, even if you think you have a concussion, there's a stepwise approach to return to work and to return to school that you should be going over with your physician. So those are the only other things I wanted to add.
I mean, I always recommend going to the doctor, because even if you need the support by like time off work, if you pay into like a medical plan and you have short-term disability, I wish I had known that I had short-term disability, but you should take it, because the best recovery is rest. So look for those things, and or if you are a family member helping out, maybe look those things up for that person, because like they're already going through a lot, and having someone take charge of the support steps that they could use definitely will help them out too. Dorianne, it's funny you mentioned the mouth guard. I had Invisalign on in the accident, and I definitely think my injury would have been a lot worse had I not had the trays in. So on top of that, I recommend going to get, if you don't like those mouth guards that you boil and you form to your teeth, go to your dentist and get a mouth guard custom made. It is a little bit more expensive, but they're neater in your mouth. You don't feel them as much, doesn't affect your speech as much.
I can also jump in on the return to work side of it, because like it's where I actually work. Even for people who are maybe don't have as severe of a concussion or feel like they can return to work sooner, there are still options. Turn my video on. There are still options for accommodations and for equipment you can use to help. Because if you think of like a healthy brain and going into an office every day, you have overhead lighting, you have your computer, you have background noise, you have your phone, you have all these different sensory things happening. And even in the cases of people who feel like they can return to work within a couple of weeks of their concussion or a few days, there is still a lot of sensory overload you don't realize until you're literally in your workplace and you're sitting there and you're staring at your computer screen and it's super bright and there's lights overhead that you can't turn off and there's people talking behind you. You can't filter it the way that you think you can. So even if you feel like you can return to work soon, I would still look at those accommodations, whether it's gradually building up your hours, whether it's reducing your computer time and slowly building it up, whether it's asking for equipment, asking for a screen to put over your monitor to help with glare, whether it's sitting in a low lit area or quiet area. All of those things are ways to help get you back successfully without fully impacting your job itself. You still have function. You're just finding ways to work within your limitations, and that's okay to ask. So if you have those short-term disability programs, even if you don't, talk to your employer about what you have available to you. You don't necessarily have to share your medical condition, but it's worth it to consult with your doctor, see what's available to you, because it will make a huge difference rather than trying to throw yourself back in all at once. We often see failed return to works as a result of those, because you want to get back, you're motivated, you feel like you can be there, and then as soon as it all hits at once, it's like being hit with a ton of bricks. And I don't know if that was your experience too when you got back, Victoria.
Yeah, it was definitely not pretty, because you're sitting at the computer. I would fall asleep just sitting at the computer, and then a loud noise would startle me, and then I would be a mess and angry, and so yeah, definitely take advantage of those things. I didn't know, so it's always good to have. I wish I'd had that knowledge back then. Another important thing to note is when weightlifting. I know that we're usually stationary, but you can probably get a concussion even on the simplest movements like a deadlift. When you're doing touch and goes, you're dropping the weight and it's jolting your body. And sometimes you can jolt just the right way and your brain will absorb that shock and you'll cause a concussion. So just definitely be mindful of these things. If you're feeling weird after like a really big like deadlift session, or I remember one time I had first started doing push press and I smashed the bottom of my chin with a weighted bar. Those are things too. Everyone's done that. I see everyone laughing and nodding. But these are things that you wouldn't have thought, hey, maybe I have a concussion. So just be kind to your brain. Brain health is important. Once, like all of us are afraid of dementia one day and all of these other like degenerative brain things that could happen to us. And it's like, but take care of your brain now. So that's my story. I don't know if anyone else has any questions or comments.
Dorianne, sorry, I got a question for you.
Hey.
Knowing what you know about concussions and know long-term effects and all that jazz, Um, say you have a child who's playing hockey, and then he's got his first concussion. Would you, like, knowing what you know, would you be like, you know what, I'm done. I don't want to take any risks. It's not worth the risk for a second concussion, and it could have long-term effects, knowing that, like, say a child is young? Or would you just put him back in and hopefully it doesn't happen again? Like, I'm not asking personal. I'm asking knowing, like, as a doctor, because again, personal is a completely different situation. But you know, again, we know so many things, and we know, because I know people who had to pull their kids out of rep hockey at like 10 years old because they had 2 concussions within a year, and they're like, we can't risk that. And this was the center of the kid's life. Like, he was a great rep hockey player. So yeah. Anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a good question, because I can definitely, well, I can look at it from both perspectives, right? I mean, Pierce is he's going into AA. So, I kind of get a little bit of a benefit where he's probably not at as high of a risk of concussions as like a regular player. But I will say this, like, I think part of it depends on the severity of the concussion, right? So, I mean, there are concussions that are obviously worse than other concussions. That being said, I think that if that first concussion, if that child follows the protocols, doesn't go back too quickly, is truthful, right? Because that's the other thing. So the return to sport now is all based on symptoms. You have to ask the patient, have you had any symptoms in the last 24, 48 hours? As long as they say no, they're allowed to go back. They're allowed to go on to the next step of activity. If they say yes, then we have to go back. So if they are successfully recovering and they come to a full recovery with no post-concussive symptoms, then I don't think that would be a reason to, end that child's, their like sport altogether. That being said, I know that there's a kid on Pierce's team who had 2 concussions this year. For me as a parent, that would have probably been enough for me to pull the plug and say, that's it, we're done. If that 10-year-old has had a couple of concussions, I think that, it would definitely make me question how important this is, right? Because I know, Pierce breathes, and eats hockey, but at the end of the day, we're always telling him this is never as important as your health, right? So, so I think that, it's in a 10-year-old, if he's had 2 concussions, I would say that's enough to just say, too bad, you got to find something else that is not as high risk. I mean, it's bad enough in hockey. I think about, look at the states where football is like a religion practically, right? I think football, personally speaking, is an even higher risk. So I think, you just have to use your common sense. But because the thing is you're right. After that first concussion, every subsequent concussion, it's like it's like the effects are exponential, right? It's not just, okay, you recover from this one and you're back to baseline. You're not. You have sustained a brain injury. So you are not back at baseline after that. So you have to be extra cautious in every subsequent, time you go back.
And that's why my kids won't play football.
Exactly. Exactly. And I can tell you, if Pierce has ever, if he ever does sustain a bad enough concussion, I mean, it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it.
No, it's definitely a tough one, but it's true. It's just reminding ourselves what's our goal here. I mean, do we want to live the rest of our life healthy, or or our kids to live the rest of our lives healthy, or are we willing to take that risk because we don't want our kid to feel left out or feel bad or whatnot, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I just saw, I think it's Karen's question on the chat there, saying she's had a few concussions. Sounds like some very serious follow-up requiring shunting and stuff. So should I have concerns doing CrossFit? Yeah, I mean, I think that, CrossFit to me is not super high risk, right? The object of CrossFit is not like, attack the person coming at you with a ball and your goal is to smash them to the ground. That's obviously a much higher risk. But that being said, even in CrossFit, think about falling from a box, falling from a rope, God forbid, you're doing a rope climb and you fall, falling off the bar, just if your hand slips, right? It's that kind of stuff, which obviously is not as likely, But I think that everything you do from this point on should be with that approach in mind, right? You have to be cautious. So, you know, I would just, and I know it sounds like you're being paranoid, but it sounds like your concussion was a pretty significant one. And I just don't think it would be worth risking anything. So, you know, if you're going to do a rope climb, whatever, modify it, you know, do stuff like that where you're not putting yourself at that risk.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Again, I don't know if I'm being super paranoid now. Would it be like something like, say, someone who's still, say, recovering and paranoid, maybe not using a barbell and maybe just sticking with dumbbells, so there's a less chance of them smashing their face with the chin,
100%.
just because, again, they're going to get the same stimulus, right? They might feel left out because they're not in the class, like, per se, but they're doing the exact same thing. And honestly, I think dumbbells is harder than
Exactly.
anyway.
And
So
I think, yeah, I see what you're saying, right, Chris? But the other thing too is, like, we've all, I don't know, I know I have a couple of times hit our chin with that bar. But think about it now, if you've had 2 concussions, right, where if I've never had a concussion and I smash my chin with the bar, you know, my brain is still pretty, it's naive to injury, right? So it's going to tolerate a lot more. Whereas Karen's already had a couple concussions. So she's going to, you know, her brain is not going to tolerate as big of a hit. So maybe for her, it's just going to be a gentle kind of smack on the chin, but could possibly do a little bit more damage. So I think, like, that would be a perfect modification to do, right? Do the same exercise, just modified with dumbbells, and you're not risking that, you know, that kind of accident happening, but you can absolutely still get your exercise in. So it's just about, you know, using your common sense and being cautious and working around things.
I mean, and I guess that also goes with, like, don't be afraid to use your accommodations, whether they're at work, whether they're in sport, whether they're at CrossFit. Don't feel bad that you're not over here right now and you're over here and you need help to get back. That doesn't make you less than, it doesn't make you less of an athlete. Like, you're fine. Just use the support that you need. Margaret would like to know the concussion clinic info. Dor, what was the name of the concussion clinic again?
You know what? I'm going to find it for you. Just give me 2 seconds and I will give it to you. So there's one, I know the one that we go to is right on Weston Road, just north of Langstaff. And it is called Concussion. So it's KONKUSSION. And sorry, I'm just Googling it now. If I can't find it, I'll give it to Chris and he can post it. And I think there's another one actually on Highway 27, it says. Actually, there's a few of them. So it's a chain. There's I'm seeing another one in Markham. So, but anyways, yeah, if you go to concussion.com with K's instead of C's, you should be able to find it. If not, let me know, Margaret. Just text me or DM me and I can find the actual address for you.
There's another question in there for you, Dor. What if it's been years since your last concussion? Would you recommend some sort of check to see how your brain is doing?
Sorry, okay, I think I'm unmuted now. Yeah, I think it depends, right? Like, if you're not planning on doing anything else, then probably it's not, you know, mandatory. But obviously people on the chat are probably doing something like CrossFit or any kind of activity, right? I mean, think about even just riding a bike, right? Riding a bike, fall, you hit your head, same risk. So I would say, yeah. And I mean, it's such an easy service to get nowadays, right? So I think the more you can do in terms of having a baseline, especially if you are active and doing any kind of activity that would possibly, you know, risk a mild brain injury. I mean, why not, right? It's a nice thing to just have, and also nice because then your follow-up is a lot easier, right? Because you're already in the system. So I say go for it. Oh, now I don't know if you actually mean like an imaging. Imaging, no. I mean, even in kids that we're seeing with concussions, the number of kids, well, kids and adults, but I mean, you know, we see a lot of kids with concussions just in, you know, because they're active in sports and stuff. But we have, like, there are protocols for who to image in terms of brain injuries, and it's not often that a child would actually need head imaging, or anybody would need head imaging for a concussion, as long as, you know, they're medically stable. So I would say probably not as important to do that, because that's not really going to show us anything, but more to have the baseline testing done is probably more in your best interest.
I know that in the chat here, there are some people who have concussions, and I just wanted to just go back really quick to some things that you might be feeling now during the quarantine. I know that during the quarantine, everybody is trying to learn new skills and trying to better themselves, trying to work out, trying to lose weight. Try not to add that pressure to yourself. One of the things that I found was working out really taxed my central nervous system, and lifting weights knocked me out for hours, and I would need to sleep afterwards. Another thing was extreme anxiety, and I can't imagine going through it now with the added layer of this COVID anxiety on top of the anxiety of the brain injury. So just like, remember to be kind to yourself. Maybe introduce some meditation when you're feeling anxious, or do something that will bring you back to the present. So try to acknowledge something that triggers all 5 of your senses, something you could smell, something you can see, just to bring you back to the present moment when you start feeling anxious. And just at the end of the day, be kind of yourself and take care of yourself. Really, that's the message. I think that the symptoms last a different amount of time for everybody, depending on how bad your concussion was and how well you take care of it. So if you're rushing back, you might experience a longer recovery. So for me, because I rushed back, I would say it was like 6-7 months, not more. But it could be 2 weeks. It could be a week. Doriana, did the protocol change for what you do after concussions? I remember back in the day, it was like every 3 hours. You couldn't go to sleep and you had to be woken up. Is that different now?
I don't have the guidelines in front of me, but generally speaking, if it's a mild concussion, you don't really have to do that. You know, a lot of parents call with that concern, like, you know, my child fell and hit her head at the park. Do I have to wake her up every 2 hours? Like, no, not if they're, you know, completely fine. They did not have that loss of memory. They're not vomiting. They're not complaining of a headache or dizziness, that kind of thing. If they're having those symptoms, then it's never going to hurt to do that. But the key is usually again, I don't have the guidelines in front of me, but from what I remember the last time, just kind of looking them up quickly, was the biggest thing is to give yourself brain rest. And that should be about 24 to 48 hours. And what we mean by brain rest is actually not using your brain. So it's not like there's no reading, there's no watching any kind of screen, no TV, nothing where your brain is required to process information, basically. So that lasts about 24 to 48 hours. Once that period is over, if that patient is feeling better, then most of the return to work and return to sport now is symptom-based. So we'll tell people, okay, let's say it's a kid who's played hockey and they've gotten a concussion. So there's going to be absolutely no return to activity for 2 weeks, right? So it's no hockey, no practice, no nothing. After the 2-week period, if that child is saying, you know what, I feel fine, I don't have a headache, I'm not dizzy, you know, I'm able to sleep properly, that kind of stuff, then we'll say, okay, you can go on to the ice for a leisurely skate for 10 minutes and see how you feel. If you can do that, and again, I'm just kind of making up an example because I don't have the guidelines in front of me, but if you can do that and you're not having any symptoms, you're skating, you don't feel dizzy, you don't have a headache, you're not feeling foggy or confused, then you can do that for a few days or a week, let's say, and then you can go on to the next level of activity, which would involve maybe a short practice with your team. So everything is very kind of gradual. And then the minute that the patient experiences a symptom again at that level, we go back a level until you can do that without any symptoms again. So it'd be the same with return to work, right? If you can be on your computer, let's say you have a job, if you can do 20 minutes of work and not have a headache, then you continue with that for about a week. Then you can increase the time slowly, slowly, slowly until you get back to your regular kind of hours.
Very good, thank you.
All right, guys, I think we're approaching an hour here. I think there was a lot of good information that we got, a lot of great personal perspective that I know for me, I'm going to reflect and be like, oh my God, there's so many things that I didn't realize that I potentially was going through and I didn't know just because I didn't, what we knew about concussions then to now is not even on the same planet right now. But, I appreciate you telling us your story and, Doriana also giving us your feedback and your knowledge as well with how, we can, address these situations as well. And, appreciate everyone for coming on today.
Guys, thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to come listen to this. I appreciate it.
Awesome.
And thanks,
See you later.
Thanks,
for
Victoria.
the platform.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, Vic.
Bye, thank you.
Thanks, Victoria. That was really amazing. I didn't know that about
Thank you, Doriana.
I'm glad you're feeling better anyways. It's tough.
Thanks.
Thanks for sharing.